Perfect timing. We will call the meeting to order for the Sacramento Metropolitan Fire District's Finance and Audit Committee for Thursday, July 27th, 2017. First item of business is public opportunity to discuss matters of public interest within the committee's scope, including items on or not on the agenda. Do we have any speaker cards, Madam Clerk?
There are no speakers this evening.
So many people and not any of them want to talk?
Not a one.
Then we will move on to consent items. If it pleases the group, I would accept a motion.
Make a motion.
I second.
Excellent work, you two.
Thank you.
Thank you, then. We have a motion and a second on the consent agenda. Madam Clerk, will you please call the roll?
Director Orzali.
Aye.
Director Sheets.
Aye.
And Director Kelly.
Aye.
Motion passes.
All right, on to our presentation items. Number one, the California Employers Retiree Benefit Trust Account Annual Update. Ms. Thomas.
Good evening, directors, Chief Bridge. I'm here this evening just to, before I hand it off to Matt Goss, who is our guest presenter, just to provide a little bit of context for his presentation. So as you may know, about 5 years ago, the district made a really important decision, which is that if we're going to offer a retiree medical benefit, then we should ensure the sustainability of that benefit by funding it as it's earned. And the way that we do that is by making contributions to the California Employers Retiree Benefit Trust, or what you'll sometimes hear me refer to as CERBT, which is a trust that's administered by CalPERS, and it's specifically to fund retiree medical benefits. So the money that we deposit in that trust can only be used to fund future retiree medical premiums. So that's really the context for the presentation this evening. Matt's going to come up and talk about our participation in the fund and sort of how that's performed over time. But I wanted to kind of link this back to what we talk about every other month when I pull up that last slide in my presentation and we see the chart with the blue and the green, and we see how our contributions and investment earnings over time are building to help us be able to fund those benefits when we have those costs in the future. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Matt Goss.
Thanks, Amanda. Appreciate it. Good evening, I think it is, everybody. I appreciate you having me out once again to talk about the specific account performance and what's evolved over the last 12 months with your OPEB assets that are irrevocably dedicated with our trust fund. I think Amanda did a really good job of summarizing the why you all decided to do this. And what I'd like to do is focus specifically on the asset liability relationship and how you're progressing in a positive way. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in and encourage you all to ask me questions at any time. I'll do my best to try to answer those. Let's go back. Okay. So we'll first start by talking about the liability. When I was here last year, we also talked about these exact same numbers. The reason for that is because these numbers are updated on a 2-year cycle or a biennial basis. So you can see from the data at the top of this slide in the blue bar, this liability is as of July 1, 2015. And it's quite large. It's $226,853,972. So this quest that you're on to better fund this liability is not one that's going to happen overnight. It's more like a marathon. But you've done some really good things in the almost 5-year period of time. Next month will be your 5-year participation anniversary date. The number beneath that first row titled Actual Accrued Liability is larger simply because that number includes on top of the liabilities that have already been earned through July 1, 2015, an additional projected amount for the future liabilities that have not yet been earned by your active people that come to work each and every day. People like those sitting over there, people like me on behalf of the state. So it's a larger number, but it's not really the number you're chasing. The number that you're chasing is the $226 million. What the actuary does is give you an annual amount to try to accomplish, if possible, if budgetary conditions allow. And that amount is the annual required contribution of $20,839,933. And then finally, you have contributions that you're making every single month over the course of each fiscal year that count as part of the $20 million in annual required contributions. Those are those pay-as-you-go costs of $9,514,561. And on top of that, the next row down, titled Implicit Rate Subsidy of $3,503,500. So basically, if each year you didn't send a dime to our trust fund, you're already tackling just around $13 million out of your $20 million actuarially determined annual required contribution. And then if you send the difference to us, then you're doing all that your actuary is suggesting that you do to accomplish the long-term goal of fully funding that $226 million liability, assuming a couple things, assuming like an amortization schedule similar to paying off a house. And also, as you can see on the bottom row of this slide, assuming that you earn an investment return of 6.44% over a period of 20, 25, 30 or so years. So that's the liability picture, right? Let's take a look now at slide number 4. This is the asset picture, and then I'm going to go back to slide 3. You can see that back in August of 2012, you started things off by contributing a $1,777,000 and change contribution. And then you have contributed additionally since that date through June the 30th of this year, $22,069,853. So you've done some really good work during that 5-year period. What we've been able to do to help your cause is generate $3,503,030 in investment income. So our investment income generation, combined with your investment principal contributions through June the 30th of this year, places you at $27,298,442. That does include a subtraction of $51,559. That represents every penny rounded to the nearest dollar that we've charged you. We being CalPERS. That includes our custodian, which is State Street Bank, and all of the people that work on Wall Street that do investments that get paid for that work. It literally does not exclude a single penny. So to pay $51,500 to generate $3.5 million is a pretty good outcome in a period of about 5 years. One that I think you can be happy with. We always want better, but it's not bad. If I was to calculate the annualized rate of return net of all fees through that period, it's 6.38%. So you're tracking really, really closely to that previous number of 6.44% that your actuary is assuming. You know, it's not usually to the specific basis point or to the specific penny, but if you're within 6 basis points, then you're right on schedule. Things are going according to plan. Last year when I came and talked to you, you weren't where you wanted to be quite as well. You were at 5.02%. So that number went up a lot, in large part because of last fiscal year's 10.74% return. So I took the liberty to add that row there to show you where you got a lot of your volume in terms of investment income generated in that period there. So, you know, a lot of good news. So if you go back to this slide, this will make a lot more sense now. The blue bars represent the progressive increase in investment principal contributions contributed to our program by the district. And then what that light blue bar does is show the total pool of assets that are irrevocably dedicated on behalf of the district. And what you want to see long-term is what you're starting to see now, which is that light blue bar starting to increase in height to greater proportions than those blue bars. And if you look at the furthest right blue bar that has that $23.85 million number, you compare it to the $27.3 billion number above it, that represents the difference between all your money and what you gave us. So you want to see a progressively increasing separation between those two variables there. If I come back next year and you don't, doesn't mean it's panic time. This is a long-term deal, but you're hoping to see that, and so am I. Okay, so this slide is pretty just straightforward. It shows what you're doing on an annual basis as measured by fiscal years. You have not ever taken money out, so it's really simple. It just shows the money that you've contributed in aggregate for the respective fiscal years of your participation. And you've been increasing the amount that you've been putting in. So you increasingly are putting your money where your mouth is. You're committing additionally each year to your funding policy. And the results speak for themselves in terms of whether or not that would be assessed as a good decision. I agree with Amanda that it was an important decision to set this thing up, but I also believe, and I think it was inferred, that it's also an ongoing decision, right? Because this is a voluntary deal, to continue to maintain the commitment levels if you can afford to do so, because it's going to save you money over the long term, and then that's more money to do other good things with. This is a really good illustration of everything that I just said. It shows that between the period June 30 of 2015 to where we are now in the summer of 2017, you almost doubled your funded ratio. If we assume that your liability on your new report that you'll be getting later this fall goes up from $226 million to $245 million. So the assets here are real, and so is the 2015 liability number of $226 million, but we're taking a guesstimate on that $245 million by doing a roll forward calculation. It could be very different when you get that report back from your actuary. So a nice little exercise to do, Ron and Amanda, will be, once you get that finalized report, divide your assets as of June 30, 17 by the true liability from that report, and then determine if it's actually 11.12% or some number different than that. Okay. The takeaway from this slide is you're moving in the right direction, and like I said earlier, it's not going to probably happen overnight, but nor were the liabilities created overnight. I wanted to include this slide because every 4 years we review our investment policy, which is mistakenly sometimes believed to be identical to the CalPERS pension fund. It is not identical. We have our own independent, unique, distinct investment policy. And what we do is we review that policy on its merits every 4 years. And we're in that year where we take 12 full months to do that. And we'll complete that process in December. And then we'll spend about 6 months determining what the next portfolio candidates are and how and if they differ from the current 3. And then around September of 2018, we'll release that information to our customers. This is important because the discount rate of 6.44% used by your actuary the last time that report was generated takes into account what the investment vehicle expects to be able to generate an investment rate of return over a long period of time, and what your cash flow intent is into the vehicle. So if we lower our expectations, and that in turn lowers your discount rate, your liabilities go up. So then you're no longer 12% funded, you're 8% funded. So this is an asset liability teeter-totter, and it's an ongoing relationship game that you're really trying to win. And then you also have the financial reporting outcomes that are now directly tied to that based on the new accounting standard, GASB 75, which replaces the old one, GASB 45. So if you can somehow continue to move in the direction of higher funding levels, you're going to benefit in the financial reporting realm right on the balance sheet of your financial statements. So for this 17 valuation, no change to these numbers here. But for the 19 valuation, 2 years from now, we'll have new data. My guess at this time is that we'll assume more conservative rates of return. I say that because the aggregate of the last 4 years that we're studying was a little below these expectations. And investment consultants paid by CalPERS say that over the next 10 years, pension returns are likely to be around 6.45%. And so these are a little optimistic in my estimation. I'm no expert, but it's probably accurate to some extent. And you're currently invested in SERPed asset allocation strategy number 1. So if you look at that column, strategy 1, this slide answers the question, what are we actually invested in? 57% stocks, global equity. That's about a 50-50 domestic, international split. So sometimes I get the question, hey, Matt, how come when the S&P 500 is doing great, it doesn't correlate directly to our SERPed account? Well, because we're not just invested in domestic stocks, right? And then fixed income at 27%, real estate at 8%, and 2 inflation protectors, tips and commodities, at a grand total of 8%, 5% and 3% respectively. So in the future, when you get really well funded, seems like a long way away now, but it happens. It's happening for hundreds of our customers that are getting better and better funded every day. You might look at strategy 2 and 3 with a lot more potential as being the new future candidate for you. And it kind of gives you a good idea of what you'd be getting yourself into. Nothing too dramatically different than what you're in now, really. The same 5 asset classes, just differing levels of participation. So I wanted to kind of prepare your minds for the future as well with this slide. Here's our rates of return, reported gross. Our gross and net returns are within 10 basis points difference because our fees are so low, so they're almost the same anyways. But the reason these are reported gross is so that we can compare them to benchmarks. All other investment data that I've reported to you so far this evening was net of all fees. But what you can see on this slide is that all 21 of these data points exceed their investment performance benchmark, which is indicative that, just like last year when I said that exact same thing, our investment policy is probably a pretty good game plan. And then based on the size of the oranges that market conditions inevitably provide us, we appear at CalPERS, in this program at least, to be squeezing out a little bit more juice than the average person holding that same bag of oranges. So we're proud of that, but we're also always looking for better results if possible. So if you look at the 5-year column, you can see that things unfolded just as one would have expected, with strategy 1 doing better than strategy 2, which then in turn did better than strategy 3. But if you look at the entire history of those 3 strategies in our trust fund, strategy 1 did the worst. So why is that? In really small font under the strategy names in the very first column titled Fund, you can see that strategy 1 was our only strategy from 2007 through 2011 in the fall. So that's the only strategy that was alive in 07 and 08 when lots of investors, including us, lost lots of money. So we're still being anchored and weighed down pretty heavily from that period. But we seem to be moving in the right direction as we continue to go forward. You joined at a better time, so you didn't start off in the red and have to come back to the black. So it worked out well for you. I mentioned low costs. I'd like to focus on that for just a moment. Last year, I talked about the cost being 10 basis points of assets under management, all inclusive. This year, it's the exact same message. This is the 4th fiscal year in a row where we've had the exact same fee rate. We had it as high as 15 basis points, which is still absurdly low. But we were able to reduce that by 33% and then hold it for 4 years. So we're feeling very, very good about cost, and we believe so should you. One of the key entities that's helping all of us benefit now is the state of California, who finally are flowing lots of money, hundreds of millions of dollars into this trust fund, and that will further stabilize our future. So we're really pleased with that, and we hope that this type of result continues to be our reality. And then I just wanted to talk a little bit about the new OPEB accounting standard. Many of you have already experienced the outcome with the new pension accounting standard, GASB 68, where you had to book the entire unfunded piece of your liability right on the balance sheet. And it has a pretty good impact on your net position overall. Well, the exact same rule is in play for GASB 75 coming up on your June 30, 2018 financial statements. So for a lot of employers like you who are not well funded yet, this is a bigger blow on the OPEB side of the fence than it is on the pension side, because most pensions are not considered well funded when they're 70, 80% funded. But here in OPEB, you're 11% funded. So this is not a good outcome for the district, but it is an outcome shared by all public employers in the state of California. So there is that optimistic viewpoint. I will be working with your staff along with my colleagues at CalPERS to share information about these new rules, to answer questions, and I will encourage you all to talk to them and have them talk to your external auditor and your OPEB actuary to make sure you're prepared for this. But in speaking with your staff, I believe they already are, and it seems like your ducks are all in a row and ready for these rules changes. I just wanted to report a few things. We're up to 29 fire protection services agencies in our trust fund and up to 524 agencies in aggregate. When I started in this program back in 2010, we had about 200 and a quarter. So it's been really fun to help be a part of a team to watch this thing grow, especially when you look at the economic conditions during that window and you think about this being a voluntary deal. So a lot of employers, just like you, are putting their money where their mouth is. They're committing to this thing, and they're not making U-turns just because things get difficult. They're doing something as opposed to nothing, and something sooner as opposed to waiting until later, and it's benefiting them. So I encourage you to look for ways to continue to do that. At the same time, I have to admit, our largest competitor today in OPEB pre-funding is the CalPERS Pension Fund, who is increasing their employer rates of contribution for many, many participating employers, because that is something that by statute they must do to maintain funding levels long term, and that's a challenge for employers, I know. So it is tough. It's a tough time. Here's a quick snapshot of the growth of the employers in the trust fund from one year to the next. So we started off like gangbusters, and I think that's mainly because employers were looking for an option, and they found us to be one of the few options out there. And then as those employers came into the program, we kind of plateaued out, and we have an annual normal of somewhere between 30 and 40 employers who join. We also have a retention rate over our historical period of about 10 years of 99+%. So most of them stay in and keep doing this, and that's good to see. It's good to know. And then as they come into the trust fund, so does money. And you can see here that we've continued to increase the total pool of assets that we're managing on behalf of all of those 524 customers, and we're approaching $7 billion. We'll get to $10 billion a lot faster than we got to $5 billion. The state of California is going to make sure of that, and we'll probably get to $20 billion much faster than we went from 5 to 10. So again, I think our future is bright, and when I say our future, I mean us, because we all share in those benefits. Without you, I don't have a job. There's no customer to serve. There's no financial reporting requirements to fulfill. So I want to make sure that you know how much we appreciate your business, that we feel it's an honor to work on your behalf, and we're here to serve you. So I'll just open it up at this point to questions, and just mention this slide, this last slide. These are direct phone numbers, email addresses. If you ever need to talk at any time on any day, please call me directly. It, again, is an honor to provide assistance to you. Any questions?
No, but Mr. Goss, thank you very much. I have no questions. Director Rosali.
I do. You mentioned in the discussion that 5 years ago we began this process, and we've made significant progress. what does success look like? How far out is the window for us to feel like we've been truly successful?
In your actuarial valuation report, and I'd have to go look at the report because on this slide, slide number 2, we don't have a row for it. There is an amortization schedule. So right now for my home that I've been living in since 2003, I've got about 5 years remaining. And at about age 47, I'm going to own that. Mm-hmm. And that's what success looks like in that scenario. But I defined that because I'm paying it a little earlier than I need to according to the mortgage company. In OPEB, success is determined specifically by each employer. It's not like pension where you have to fully fund the ARC every year. So the question is really up to you all to collectively answer. But if you're just going off the valuation report provided by your actuary, there's a number of years. And to me, that would be probably the most accurate, most relevant roadmap you currently have to define success. But you can also work with that actuary to say, currently you have us paying this thing off in 22 more years. Let's see what the numbers look like and what our budgetary capacity is to do that in 17 years. And you can look at those numbers and determine whether they're affordable, whether it's achievable. Perhaps it becomes a stretch goal. And at the end of the year, if there's a surplus of some sort, some of that or all of that can go there. I know that there's a lot of dynamics to be considered, a lot of variables to be discussed, but that might be a good route to figure out what the real answer to that question is. But to me, for you, it's once you get 100% funded of AAL, and over the long term, so we're talking about over $200 million, and that number is growing, and then that money generates enough investment income to keep pace with two main enemies for you on this. It's inflation and healthcare trend rates, and they're both built into your report. So once you get to $226 million, if your assets continue to grow through investment income only and keep pace with or outpace the growth of the liability, that's what success will really look like, because that means you're never reaching into your budget for the current year you're in to pay those benefits.
And thank you for that, because it may be that the board would be interested in actually seeing some sort of graphic representation of what success would look like.
Yeah.
Is that something you could help us with?
We could probably help you with that more in aggregate, as in all of those who participate in the trust fund and where they're at. I mean, I know we can do that. We have data and slides that illustrate that now. But for you, I think the more important component above and beyond that is defining that. And then it's trying to arrive there. And then from that point forward, it's staying there. What's going to eventually happen is you're going to have two water buckets. Okay, the first bucket was set up 50 years ago when you made the benefit promise, and there's a label on the outside of that bucket, and it's titled liability, right? You, in 2012, set up another bucket right next door to it titled assets, and you're filling up the water in that bucket, but it's nowhere near the water level in the liability bucket yet. Right now, your goal is to get those water levels equivalent, and then from that point forward, it's to maintain that equivalency as long as you possibly can. So I really feel like the better party to help you, but I'm happy to do my role, is your consulting OPEB actuary, Catherine McLeod. She can really generate multiple scenarios for you to look at and think about and determine whether they'll work for you, and probably already has to some extent. So perhaps you could have a little workshop or just another committee meeting where you talk specifically about that, and she could weigh in. I know that she does go and see clients in the field, and I've been working with her for 7 years, and she's just brilliant. So I highly recommend tapping into her mind.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate that.
Yeah, yes, sir.
Mr. Goss, thank you again. Any other questions? Ms. Sheets? No?
Have a wonderful night.
Thank you very much for coming.
You're welcome.
All right, then. Anything further from you, Ms. Thomas? All right. Then that will conclude our presentation item. Next meeting for the Sacramento Metropolitan Finance and Audit Committee will be August 24th. And at that, we will determine what time. 5:30 will probably work again, I'm thinking. All right, then. Anticipated action and presentation items at that time will be the final budget fiscal year 2017, 2018, and we stand adjourned.